Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live on this Friday afternoon. Thanks so much for being here with us. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and it's an Ask Me Anything. Lots and lots of great questions for Jimmy, and I can tell you that because they're already in. It's an internet version of Ask Me Anything. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Hello, Cyril Kellett. How are you doing today?
I don't know. I assume I am doing well, but I don't actually know. I'm at the
conference. That's because we're pre-recording and we're actually at the conference today. So neither one of us knows exactly how we're doing today, but here's hoping.
Here's hoping. The big Catholic Answers annual conference going on today. Jimmy, what dropped this morning on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
Well, today we looked at a mystery, which is normal. This was a historical mystery, but it's a historical mystery that's still going on. It's about a phenomenon known as the Toynbee tiles. Back decades ago, tiles started showing up mysteriously attached to streets in cities all around the U.S. and even in a few other countries, and they referred to Toynbee's idea. They said Toynbee idea from movie 2001, Resurrect Dead on Planet Jupiter. And that led people to start investigating the tiles and try and find out what they meant and who's behind them. They also said other weird things. And so we looked into the mystery and we reveal what's really going on with the Toynbee tiles that are still out there and still going strong.
And the Toynbee refers to Arnold Toynbee or a character in the movie?
Well, you'll have to listen to the episode to find out.
Man, of course. Check it out at mysterious.fm or on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, one of the most popular documentary podcasts in this country, certainly, and a new episode drops each Friday. About 350 episodes now?
Going on that, yeah.
Congratulations. That's a lot of mysteries and a lot of fun. People really enjoy it, and families enjoy it. Whole families are fans of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. It's family fare. You can enjoy it together as a family. All right, as I said, all the questions are in, and here we go. This one comes from Peter. Was Shakespeare a recusant, or did he become a part of the Church of England at some point in his life?
Well, what we know for sure is he did become a member of the Church of England at some point of his life, specifically when he was a baby, when he was baptized. So he was baptized. He was a member of the Church of England. He grew up in the Church of England. But there is a serious debate in Shakespeare scholarship about whether he may have been a recusant or a Catholic who recused themselves from attending Protestant services, which was compulsory at the time. And there's a little bit of evidence in that regard. What I think there's more evidence for is not that he was a recusant, someone who was publicly Catholic, because I don't think we have really good evidence for that, but that he may have been a secret Catholic. That is, someone who complied with the laws of the land openly to, maintain a Church of England identity, but who secretly practiced the Catholic faith. Or if he didn't do that, he at least had a lot of Catholic sympathies. And this is something that's apparent from his works. If you look at his plays, and it's not just his plays, but if you look at his plays, he has favorable treatments of Catholic figures in them. A lot of his plays are set in Catholic countries, and he'll portray the priests as being good and stuff. He also has what look like coded language in the plays, because he can't just come out, given the penal laws of the time, he can't, even assuming he was secretly Catholic, he can't come out and announce it in a play. So he's got to kind of tread a fine line where he slips stuff in that the audience will recognize as pro-Catholic, but he can't go too far. And so when we read his plays, there's it looks like he's maybe pushing the envelope. He's trying to signal the audience for his Catholic sympathies without crossing the line and making it explicit enough that he would get in trouble with law enforcement. So I think I would feel comfortable saying he definitely had Catholic sympathies. Mm-hmm. He may have also secretly been a Catholic. I think that's harder to establish because, he can't, if it was true, he can't be explicit about it. But this is a lively debate in Shakespeare scholarship, and people take different positions on it.
Peter, thank you for starting us out today. It's an Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin, and this one comes from In Defense of the Church. If our Lord instituted all sacraments by commanding his apostles to do them, and no one can usurp a bishop or priest, if the person doesn't have valid orders to consecrate, give absolution, confirm, ordain, etc., then why is baptism the only sacrament where anyone can baptize another person?
Well, what we find when we look at the sacraments is different sacraments have different ministers or potential ministers. And baptism is not the only one that you don't need to be a priest to do. Matrimony is the other one, because in the Latin Church, it's understood that the two parties actually marry each other. And if there's a priest or a deacon present, that priest or deacon is just serving as the church's officiant and witness to the marriage, but is not actually performing the sacrament. In fact, that didn't used to even be something that happened. It used to be that people would just marry each other without the involvement of a priest or a deacon. That changed after the Council of Trent because a problem arose connected with what are known as secret marriages. Basically, if you didn't have to have a church representative and a couple of witnesses there, how would you prove whether a marriage had actually taken place or not? There's a line that I really love in the Steve Martin movie, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. I've mentioned it on the air a few times, where Steve Martin is in a hotel room and he's kissing his girlfriend in this movie. And in voiceover, we hear him say, "My plan was to maneuver her over to the bed, marry her, and then start the whoopee machine." And that's something you could do back in the day. You could be in the heat of a romantic encounter, maneuver over to the bed, quickly say the marriage vows to each other, and start the whoopee machine. But the problem is a lot of folks the next day had second thoughts. They got buyer's remorse, and they would say, "Oh, I never married you." And this caused a huge problem. And so that's why the church eventually insisted that, at least for Catholics, you need to be married in front of a Catholic minister in order for this to be valid. It's not by divine law that that's the case, but it's by ecclesiastical law. In any event, by divine law, and even with the priest there as a mandatory representative of the church, people are still conferring the sacrament on each other. So when you look at the different sacraments, they have different ministers. In the case of baptism, anybody can baptize anybody else. In the case of matrimony, any two people who are male and female and not otherwise bound or under other problems can marry each other. When it comes to the sacraments of confirmation, the Eucharist, confession, and the anointing of the sick, you need to be at least a priest to do those. You could also be a bishop. And then in order to confer ordination, it's only done by bishops, but there's actually an open question about, do you have to be a bishop in order to confer ordination? Because there have been some cases in history where, for example, the Pope would authorize an abbot who was just a priest to ordain one of his monks to be a priest. And so there have been some cases where people who were only priests were authorized to perform ordination. And so there's a debate about that one. But the simple fact is different sacraments have different potential ministers.
In defense of the church, thank you very much for the question. That brings us to the first break. It's Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Another great podcast on EWTN Podcast Central is On the Journey. Matt, Ken, and Kenny are three former Protestants who share the ideas and experiences that led them to the Catholic Church. You can hear this and other faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates around the world, all in one place, all free at EWTN Podcast Central. Visit EWTN.com/radio and click on Podcast Central today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour and next. It's an Ask Me Anything for Jimmy, an internet version. So I get to read all the questions, and some of them come with people's real names. Some of them come with people's internet names, noms de internet. And this one comes from, I assume, a real name. Akaisha asks this. Jimmy, what exactly is the soul of a person?
Well, the term soul is used in different ways in different contexts. Sometimes in English, the term soul is used for the entire person. Like if a ship sinks at sea, you might read an account of that where it says the ship sank and 70 souls were lost. When that's the case, in English, that's usually what's known as a pars pro toto, which pars pro toto is Latin. It means a part for the whole. So you name a part of a person to indicate the whole person. And another example of a pars pro toto would be like, again, if you're on a sailing ship and the captain summons the crew, he might say, all hands on deck. Well, okay, he doesn't just mean hands. He means the persons to which the hands are attached to should come on deck. So that's another example of a pars pro toto. But in Hebrew, the word for soul it also can be used for the entire person, and it doesn't seem to be pars pro toto. For example, in Genesis 2, in the account of God making Adam from the dust of the ground, he makes Adam's body, and then the text says he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and so man became a living soul. And thus, here we have the term soul being used for the entire person. Man is a living soul. He has a body that also has the breath of life. And the word for breath is the same as the word for spirit. Well, what happened over the course of time is the term would shift in meaning, because that's what happens in language. It develops over time and words change meaning and gain new meanings and so forth. And there was a little bit of a reshuffle when it came to the term soul. Eventually, the term soul migrated from referring to the entire person to referring specifically to the immaterial part of a person. And it thus became a functional synonym for the word spirit, which also refers to the immaterial part of a person, the part that survives death. And so these days, the way the term is commonly used, your body is the physical component of you, and then your and it's material, it's made of matter. And then the immaterial part of you that is not made of matter can be referred to either as the soul or as the spirit. And it's also the life principle that animates your body, that keeps it alive. As we read in James chapter 2, just like faith without works is dead, so the body without the spirit is dead. So it's the life principle, it's the immaterial part of you. It's the same thing as soul and spirit are the same thing, however you want to say it.
All right. Thank you very much, Akaisha, for that question. This one comes from Kim. Is baptism the mark of the Lamb?
Well, certainly you can conceive of baptism in that way. That's not language that's used by Scripture. But baptism does place an indelible mark on the soul that and baptism, of course, is baptism into Jesus Christ or the Lamb of God. And so you could conceive of baptism as a mark of the Lamb. Now, as I say, though, that's not language that's used in Scripture. There is a passage in Scripture that speaks of Christ's followers having a special mark that's having a mark on their forehead, and that's in Revelation 14. In Revelation 13, we get introduced to this apocalyptic figure known as the beast from the sea, and he has a mark that is either put on people's foreheads or on their right hands, and it's a number. We're told it's the number 666, and that this is the number of a man. So if you add up the man's name or title or whatever, it's going to add up to 666, and it so happens that Nero Caesar adds up to 666, and in context, scholars have discerned that that seems to be the principal referent of the number of the beast, that the beast is associated with the line of Roman emperors, not necessarily Nero specifically, but Nero in a prominent way. Well, there are no chapter divisions in the Greek New Testament, not in the original. And so immediately after reading about the mark of the beast in chapter 13, you just keep reading and you learn about Christ's followers having a mark of protection put on their forehead. And this is based on a passage back in Ezekiel where judgment was going to fall on Jerusalem. And before the judgment fell, God had an angel go through Jerusalem and mark a tau on the forehead of all the righteous people. A tau is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it happens to look like an X. In English, it's two crossed lines. So a tau looks like a cross. And Christians have signed the mark of the cross on their foreheads all the way back through church history. And this passage in Revelation seems to be kind of at a historical nexus, because it's harkened back to the passage in Ezekiel where the tau invisibly is put on the forehead of God's followers. And here in Revelation 14, just as judgment is about to fall once again, the followers of Christ get marked again invisibly on their foreheads. We're not told specifically with what, though, but in light of the background with Ezekiel, proposing that the mark of the Lamb here in Revelation 14 is the sign of the cross because of that tau would be a good bet. And that then went on to inspire Christians to put the mark themselves with their fingers on their forehead, which we have evidence for from very, very early dates in the church.
Wow. All right. Thank you very much, Kim, for that question. This one comes from Hail Holy Queen. I've heard it's said in support of the assumption that no Christian church has ever claimed to have Mary's relics. Muslims claim to know where she is buried. Care to comment? And then the most important part, we love Cy, Jimmy, and the whole Catholic Answers team.
Well, I can't say that no Christian church has ever claimed to have Mary's relics. There's been 2,000 years and lots of people, and that includes lots of crazy people. So it wouldn't surprise me if someone somewhen had made this kind of claim. I mean, there have been people who've claimed to have Jesus's body, and that's even more implausible. But it's certainly true that of the historic churches, including the ones that have custody of the holy sites in Israel and Turkey, none of them claim to have Mary's relics. There are two locations that are associated with Mary's life after the crucifixion. One is Jerusalem, and the other is Ephesus in Turkey. The connection between the two of them is in John chapter 19. Jesus entrusts his mother's care to the beloved disciple, and the beloved disciple is most likely either John the Apostle or John the Elder, who is another eyewitness of Jesus's ministry that we know about from early Christian texts. And both John the Apostle and John the Elder spent time in Jerusalem after the crucifixion, and they both spent time in Ephesus after the crucifixion. And thus St. Jerome, for example, notes that there are two graves of John in Ephesus. And so if Mary lived with John in Jerusalem, I mean, I think it's pretty certain she would have lived with John in Jerusalem for some amount of time. the question would be, did she then live long enough to move with him, whichever John it was, to Ephesus? And there are some traditions that say, no, she didn't. She died in Jerusalem, and there is a tomb for Mary in Jerusalem. And then other traditions say, no, she went with John to Ephesus, and that's where she died. So but in neither location are her relics to be found. And so, broadly speaking, it's true that no church claims to have Mary's relics. When it comes to Muslims and what they say, well, I'd have to know what specifically these Muslims are claiming. They may have heard accounts of Mary having a tomb in Jerusalem or a tomb in Ephesus, and mistakenly thought that those tombs contain her relics, but they don't. They would be empty. And so Catholics can acknowledge, it's not required to believe she died, but Catholics can acknowledge she died and she got buried, and then God raised her up. And so I'd have to know more about the claims of these Muslims to be able to interact with them more specifically, but that's a general sketch of the matter.
Hail, Holy Queen. Thanks for the question. It's an open forum. An Ask Me Anything is what we say now. Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin, but it's of the internet variety. That's why I get to read all the questions. All the questions are already in, and this one comes from Raphael. Would the infallibility of the church be in doubt if it turned out that the whole Juan Diego, Our Lady of Guadalupe, etc. story was legendary? That is, it lacked historicity.
Okay, so it would depend on one's theory of infallibility. Now, the church holds that the Pope is infallible when he either A, teaches something definitively that is a matter of faith and morals, or B, teaches something definitively that is necessary to protect a matter of faith and morals. The first of those, when it is faith and morals, that's known as the primary object of infallibility. When it's something else that's necessary to protect the primary object, it's known as the secondary object of infallibility. So to give you an example, if the Pope infallibly defines that Jesus Christ is God, and that was defined actually long before the Pope began doing infallible definitions, but let's just suppose he did. That's a matter of faith that Jesus is God. But let's suppose, so that's primary object of infallibility. But then let's say some people come along later and say, I don't think that Pope who defined that Jesus is God, I don't think that was a real definition. I don't think that he really defined it. I think he just expressed it as a matter of his personal opinion. Well, what the church could do then is infallibly define that the previous Pope infallibly defined this. And you can see how that can be necessary to protect the point of faith or morals that the previous Pope had defined. So those are the two things. Now, matters of faith and morals are contained within what's called the deposit of faith, which has been passed down to us from Jesus and the apostles. If there was a Juan Diego, he lived long after the time of Jesus and the apostles, so his existence and his sainthood would not be part of the deposit of faith. So they'd have to be part. So if this is infallibly defined, it would have to be part of the secondary object of infallibility. And that's where we hit a point of debate. A lot of people have said that saint canonizations are infallible. And so if it turned out there was no Juan Diego, then since John Paul II infallibly defined that he's a saint on this view, then that would create a problem for the church's infallibility. However, other scholars have said, what makes someone a saint is them dying in a state of grace. And it doesn't seem necessary to know whether someone died in a state of grace centuries later. That doesn't seem necessary to protect anything that's in the deposit of faith. And so saint canonization should not be infallible. And if that's the case, then if it turned out Juan Diego did not exist, then it wouldn't cause any problem for the church's infallibility. Having said all that, this issue was raised before Juan Diego was canonized, and the Congregation for the Causes of Saints did look in to the matter, and they concluded, no, he really did exist. Some of the stories connected with him may or may not be true, but they concluded he really did exist. Also, in terms of the Our Lady of Guadalupe apparition, it would be a matter of private revelation, and private revelations are never obligatory for the Christian faithful, and therefore that wouldn't impact the church's infallibility at all.
Raphael, thank you very much for the question. I certainly hope that was helpful to you. Lots and lots of questions to come. It's an Ask Me Anything for Jimmy, but I know there's lots and lots of questions to come because I've got them right in front of me, and lots of great ones in there. So hang on. We will continue with an internet version of Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
From its earliest days, Catholic faith has been lived by a yearly cycle of feasts and seasons. The new book from Mike Aquilina and Adam Lucas, Feasts of Our Fathers, is a one-stop companion for praying and meditating through the holy days and seasons of the Church with help from the most ancient Christian people. Don't just read about the early saints, pray with them. Order your copy of Feasts of Our Fathers now at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it's an Ask Me Anything. And when we say Ask Me Anything with Jimmy, people ask anything, so all kinds of questions. These have come from the internet. The questions are already in, and this one's from Stephen. Can Catholics watch Game of Thrones?
Well, not the last two seasons.
Wait.
Wait, I heard those were the two. I heard that those were the two that were bad. That the writers just kind of gave up on telling a good story.
All right, yeah. Don't watch the bad ones.
Well, I've never watched Game of Thrones. All I've ever seen of it are some little clips, on YouTube talking about character development and things like that, and how they handled certain characters. Just because I'm interested in the craft of writing, but I've never watched the show itself. My understanding is it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy series by George R.R. Martin, if I recall correctly, and it contains, at least from what I've heard, some content that is contrary to the Christian faith, having people engaging in various forms of lascivious behavior, for example. And there's nothing wrong with depicting people committing sins, whether it's violence or betrayal or lying or even lascivious behavior. Read the Bible. It's got all that stuff in it. But the Bible does not glorify people doing those things. And I gather, this is only what I've heard, that Game of Thrones does. And so it does seem to contain some morally objectionable content. Well, so does life. And we're not called to have nothing to do with life. And so the question, even though we are going to encounter people who do morally objectionable stuff, so it becomes a matter of knowing oneself and knowing what benefits and costs there are to consuming a particular piece of media. If I know myself and I know that I'm not going to be tempted to do anything bad as a result of watching Game of Thrones, then that objectionable content is going to come as a cost to me. I'm going to have to tolerate it. And so the question would then be, do I get enough benefit from watching the show? Is it enjoyable enough or mentally stimulating enough, to think about the characters and what they're going to do and stuff like that? Do I get enough benefit to offset the cost of having to endure the morally objectionable material? If the answer is yes, if it does offset the cost of having to endure the offensive material, yeah, then I can go ahead and watch it. If it doesn't, well, then it's not wrong of me to watch it, but I should do something else. If you shouldn't invest your time in something that's got more cost than benefit for you. On the other hand, if I know myself and I know that I may be tempted to do things even mentally that are inspired by the immoral content of the show, then I shouldn't watch it. And so it really comes down to knowing yourself and figuring out how much costs and benefits there are. If this show is going to have pose a serious temptation to you, well, then you should avoid it. If it's not going to pose a serious temptation for you, well, then you make a prudential decision based on how much cost and benefit there is.
Stephen, thank you very much for the question. I hope that was helpful to you. Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin. This one comes from Shubes13. What specifically in Thomistic metaphysics do you have the most trouble believing, and why?
Well, I'd have to think about it, but one thing that leaps to mind is an item that Aquinas borrowed from Aristotelian metaphysics, which is the idea that matter is the principle of individuation. What he means by that is that it's the matter that something contains that makes it an individual, that makes it different than something else. So, for example, Cy Kellett and I are both human beings. We both, thus, on Aristotelian and Thomistic metaphysics, would have the form of a human. But what makes me a different individual than Cy is I'm made out of one chunk of matter, and Cy is made out of another chunk of matter. And so matter is what makes us two individuals within the general human species. And so for Aquinas, holding that matter is what makes individual members of species, he then infers that since angels don't have matter, they can't be individuals within a species. And so every angel must be its own species. So Gabriel is a different species than Michael, and Michael is a different species than Raphael. Well, I don't see any good reason for saying matter is the only principle of individuation that can exist. God could, in addition to having matter be a principle for individuating material things, he could have something else. Let's call it spirit, be a principle of individuation for spiritual things. So in the case of humans, well, Cy and I both have human souls. What makes my soul different than Cy's soul is it's made of different spirit. So even when we lose our bodies and no longer have the matter separating us as individuals, my soul is still separate from Cy's soul. We still have individual souls, but they both belong to the species of human. And so if that can happen with human souls, the same thing can happen with angelic spirits, to where you could have, here are all the seraphim, and this also fits the biblical data, because the biblical data puts angels in classes like seraphim and cherubim and so forth. And so I would say, yeah, okay, here are all these cherubim. That's their kind, that's their species. And within that, the individual spirits are separated by the fact they're made out of different spirit. So Gabriel and Michael and Raphael, they're all reputed to be archangels. Well, what makes them different within that class is Gabriel is one spirit, Michael is another spirit, Raphael is another spirit. Each one has its own spirit that it consists of, and that's what makes them different. So I don't buy the principle from Aristotle through Thomas that that matter is the only principle of individuation.
Shubes 13, great question. Thank you very much for that. You're my favorite Shubes now, of all of them. Shubes 13, you are my favorite. Bo wants to know this. Could Sikhism be said to worship the one true God?
Okay, so first of all, we should say what Sikhism is, because not a lot of people here in the West necessarily know what it is. And before Cy Kellett makes the obvious pun, I will go for it and say Sikhism is not the same thing as findism.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you for taking that off the table.
No
Removing
problem.
the temptation. Thank you.
So Sikhism is an offshoot. It's an Asian religion. It's an offshoot of Hinduism and Islam. And like Hinduism, it believes in reincarnation, but like Islam, it believes in the existence of only one God. So it's a monotheistic religion. Well, anybody who addresses their prayers to Creator at universe.reality is going to be heard by God, because God knows they're talking to him. If you're talking to the Creator, God knows you're talking to him. And so unless a particular Sikh, and this is true not just of Sikhs, but of Christians and Jews and Muslims and anybody else, anyone who's talking to the Creator is talking to God. Anyone who's praising the Creator is praising God. Anyone who's worshiping the Creator is worshiping God. As long as you're not putting something in the way, like, oh, yeah, I worship the true God, provided he's not the God of the Jews. You know, if you have a greater stipulation like, oh, but he can't be the God of the Jews. If he's the God of the Jews, then I'm not worshiping the Creator. Well, if that was your attitude, then no, you wouldn't be worshiping God, because the Creator is the God of the Jews. But very few people put that kind of ridiculous stipulation onto their prayers and their acts of worship. So I would say that Sikhs, like other monotheists who are praying to and praising the Creator, are praising and worshiping God, as long as they're not adding some overriding bizarre stipulation.
All right. Thank you very much, Bo, for the question. I think, let's do another one before we have to take a break. Alternative Factory 7190. If public revelation has ended, but the canonization of saints is an infallible act, does that make what the saints have revealed public revelation?
No, it does not. In fact, when the church canonizes a saint, all it's asserting is that the saint is in heaven, and the person is in heaven, and the faithful can, by extension, model their lives on the example of the saint, and they can ask the saint for their intercession, but it does not engage any private revelations the saint may have reported in their life. In fact, the Congregation for the Causes of Saints does not look in to their private revelations beyond maybe just ascertain that they don't contain anything heretical. So when a canonization occurs, it does not declare all of the saints' reported private revelations to be authentic, to be genuinely supernatural, much less does it make them public revelation. So you really have to look at that separately. About all you can conclude is that, okay, this person who is in heaven did report this, and it presumably doesn't contain anything heretical, and we can have some positive attitude towards it, but we can't conclude that it is genuinely supernatural just from a canonization, and we certainly cannot conclude that it's binding public revelation. That's public revelation is binding on everybody. Private revelation is not. So it does not make it public revelation, and that's even assuming that saint canonizations are infallible. But as we heard earlier, there's reason to question whether saint canonizations are infallible, and frankly, I would put myself in the camp of theologians who don't see a good reason why you need to know that someone is in heaven in order to protect an item of the faith.
Alternative Factory 7190, thank you for that question. Lots more questions to come. It's an internet version of Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin. We'll continue right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on, we'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Carry the faith wherever you go. You can enjoy EWTN television and radio live streams, many of our popular TV and radio shows on demand, prayers and devotionals, and keep up on the latest Catholic news. Download the EWTN app at EWTNapps.com and join the EWTN family today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Thanks so much for being here with us. If you're new to what we do, you can check out what we do at Catholic.com. That's our website, Catholic.com. And today we've got questions that people have sent to us. And one way you can send questions is radio@Catholic.com. If you'd like to, we'll get the questions to Jimmy, radio@Catholic.com. But Jimmy's also online in all kinds of social media settings. You can find him and get your questions directly to him as well. And Alternative Factory 7190 just asked a question, but there's a second question from Alternative Factory 7190, and it's this. Do I have to say the Divine Mercy do I have to say the Divine Mercy as Jesus told St. Faustina, or say the Rosary every day as Our Lady told the children of Fatima? If I don't, am I disobeying Jesus and his mother? And private revelations contradict one another. And can contradict one another. And if so, which ones should I follow?
Okay, so in regard to the first part of this question, in private revelations, sometimes the visionary will perceive that Jesus or his mother or someone is recommending a particular devotion. They may even tell, like in the case of the Fatima children, Mary told the Fatima children to say the Rosary every day, but that doesn't make it binding on everybody. In point of fact, as we've mentioned, private revelation is not binding on the faithful. You are not required to believe it. And so consequently, any devotion that is reported, even in a genuine private revelation, is to be understood as a recommendation or an invitation, not as a mandate from heaven, you must do this or you're sinning. Because if it's triggered the penalty of sin, then it would be binding on everyone the way public revelation is binding, and it's not. So any kind of devotion that gets proposed by even a genuine private revelation is only ever an invitation or recommendation. It does not bind under pain of sin. Having said that, Alternative Factory asks, can private revelations contradict one another? Well, obviously false revelations can contradict true ones, and in that case you should follow the true ones, not the false ones. What about the true ones, though? Can they ever contradict each other? Well, I can see two ways that could happen. The first way is because these revelations are humanly received, the church acknowledges that the consciousness of the seer affects things. There's a famous example from the time of Pope Benedict XIV back in the 1700s. In his day, there were some visionaries who were seeing Christ crucified with 3 nails, one through each palm and one through both feet together. So you get a total of 3 nails. But other visionaries were seeing him crucified with 4 nails, one through each palm and one through each ankle. And so there was a dispute. Oh, horrors, which one should we follow? Well, Pope Benedict XIV's solution was, don't stress about it. God has not given people these visions to teach them the number of nails Christ was crucified with. Don't treat this, he didn't have the concept of videotape, but don't treat this like it's videotape. This is something that the reason God has given these visions is to help people appreciate what Christ did on the cross, not to teach us little lessons about the history of exactly how it happened. And so the seer's consciousness fills in these details, like how many nails are there. And so because the seer's consciousness can fill in stuff, that could lead to a contradiction between one genuinely supernatural apparition and another genuinely supernatural apparition, because it has that human component that could contradict something from the other apparition, either on the human level or on the divine level. So God could really be moving in both cases, but the seers might understand things a little differently in a way that, at least on the surface, generates contradiction. The second way that I can see a contradiction arising is if the revelations are targeted for fundamentally different times. For example, let's suppose there's a country in the 1500s and it's war-torn, and Mary appears to somebody and says, I want people to say devotion X to end the war. And that's why she wants them to do this devotion, is to end the current war. Well, okay, you could have an apparition, say, 400 years later in a peace-filled, prosperous land, and Mary appears to someone, and let's say the seer asks, hey, by the way, do people need to do devotion X? Mary might say, no, they don't need to do devotion X. And the reason would be, well, devotion X was meant for that situation 400 years ago when there was a war. It's not meant for today. And so you could have a contradiction in that sense because of the change in circumstances. In terms of how to figure out which ones to follow, well, the basic rule that I recommend to folks is follow the ones that have been approved by the magisterium. And unless you've got a lot of time on your hands and really want to dig into the weeds to do an investigation on your own, then I would say don't really pay attention to the ones that aren't approved by the church.
Alternative Factory, thank you for all the great questions. It's Ask Me Anything. Jimmy Akin's our guest. This one comes from Patrick. What would someone like Lazarus? How many people there are like Lazarus? What would someone like Lazarus?
A lot.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. What would someone like Lazarus's marital status be after he was resurrected? Given that the marital bond is severed upon death, would he still be obliged to his wife if he had one, or anyone else in Lazarus's situation?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of people in this situation now, because beginning in the 1950s and 60s, we developed techniques that allowed us to restart people's hearts. Prior to that, in church history, spontaneous recovery from cardiac arrest did happen. There are cases where someone is clinically dead and their heart just restarts on its own. It's rare, but it does happen. Well, then we figured out how to make it happen with a fair degree of reliability. It doesn't always work, but we have a fair degree of reliability, and that created hundreds of thousands of Lazaruses today, where someone did clinically die, and then we brought them back. Well, okay, so how do we handle the marriage situation, the marriage bond in that case? Because it's clear that from the New Testament that once you die, you're no longer married and your surviving spouse can marry someone else. So how do we adjudicate this? Well, the answer is the church hadn't made a ruling yet. The church has not addressed this issue authoritatively. So what I'm about to say is speculation, but I'll try to give you good speculation. In the first place, one way of handling it would be to say what really severs the marriage bond is permanent death. Temporary death, where your heart is offline for a few minutes or hours, does not sever the bond, but permanent death does. And so since someone who goes into the hospital and has cardiac arrest and then their heart gets restarted, that was not permanent death, so they're still bound to their prior spouse. In Lazarus's case, it's a little different because he was dead for a few days and it took a supernatural act to bring him back. And so you could say Lazarus did permanently die and Jesus brought him back miraculously. Well, in that case, you could go either way. If permanent death severs the marriage bond, then Lazarus could have had his marriage bond severed and he would be free to marry someone else. On the other hand, he could simply reaffirm. That wouldn't necessarily happen. You know, if he comes back and he regards himself as still married to his former spouse, then he's effectively exchanged matrimonial consent with this person. And there wasn't any requirement in his time that you exchange matrimonial consent in a public way. So he and his spouse, as soon as they start, hugging after he's come back from the dead and they're hugging and kissing and I'm so glad you're back and everything. If they regard themselves as still married, they're still going to be married because they just exchanged matrimonial consent again, even if the bond was severed. Now that's different today because today, at least in the Catholic Church, you do have to exchange public consent you have to exchange matrimonial consent in a public forum. You have to get married before a priest or a deacon. And so what do we do with all these people who did die, but then got brought back? We could either say that mere clinical death isn't enough to sever the marriage bond. That's kind of what I was going for with permanent death would sever it, but not clinical death. On the other hand, I find it very hard to imagine the church giving its blessing to you're free to marry somebody else now just because you had cardiac arrest and came back. I think it would be very unlikely that the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith would approve of that. They may have to address it at some point. Someone may bring this up in a court case, but I suspect the ruling is going to be that if you return to this life, you're still bound to the person that you agreed to be married to for the course of this life. Exactly how they'll justify that, I'll have to wait and see, but that's my suspicion on what the ultimate ruling would be.
Thank you very much for that question. That was Patrick. Jimmy, this one comes from Chris. Can a Protestant convert to Catholicism and be a faithful Catholic without practicing any devotion to Mary or the saints?
Yeah, the church doesn't mandate that you have any particular devotion to Mary or to the other saints. The only thing that I'm aware of that really impacts this is at the moment in Mass where we say the Confiteor, or the I confess to Almighty God, in Mass where we confess our sins. And there is a line in that of, therefore I ask Mary, ever Virgin, all the angels and saints to pray for me to the Lord our God. So since that's in the liturgy, we're supposed to say that, but that's not really showing devotion. That's just a request for prayer. And having like a particular devotion that goes beyond that, no, it's not mandatory. It's healthy. It's a good thing to do. I understand it may take some time as people who are not used to having Marian devotion. It takes a while to acquire it. But is it mandatory beyond that one little line in the Mass? No, not really.
Chris, thank you. I hope that was helpful to you. Lots and lots more questions to come. It's an internet version of Ask Me Anything, and the internet has lots of questions for Jimmy Akin, so hang on. We'll do this for another hour. Today, we are at our annual conference. The Catholic Answers Annual Apologetics Conference is going on, so we have pre-recorded this show for you, and there is lots more to come. And I know, for a fact, lots of great questions, because I got them right in front of me. We'll be right back with more Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Thanks for being here with us. We continue with Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin, our guest. Jimmy, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where each Friday, including today, you can find a new episode. At least that's been the case for the last 350 or so Fridays. So check them all out. Today's episode, I forgot. I'm all the way stuck back in the Zodiac episode, and so I'm sorry. I forgot.
The Toynbee tiles.
Oh, the Toynbee tiles, yeah. Yeah, weird. All right, the Toynbee tiles. Mm-hmm. Check it out at mysterious.fm or wherever you get your podcasts, or check it out on YouTube, where Jimmy's got all kinds of stuff going on at YouTube. All these questions that we have today, or for the whole day today, have come from the internet, and they got the questions to Jimmy, and Jimmy put them on a page for me, and I get to read them. Jimmy gets to answer them. So it's an Ask Me Anything, but it's the internet version of the Ask Me Anything. And this one comes from Beth, and Beth wants to know about Jimmy. Beth says, what does a day in the life of Jimmy Akin look like? I know so many of us are in awe of your depth and breadth of knowledge. It would be interesting to see how you structure your day with learning, etc.
Well, of course, I have things going on other than learning. So in order to explain how I structure my day to include learning, I guess I need to mention a few other things. Basically, I wake up sometime between 6 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. And as soon as that happens, I roll out of bed, I get dressed, and I make the long commute from my bedroom to my home office, which is, 15 feet or so. And but once I get to my home office, I check my email, and I have certain web pages I check. I check a news aggregator. I have a science news aggregator that I check every day. It's called Real Clear Science. And I may check a few other things. There's a news aggregator I sometimes check. That's instapundit.com for people who are curious. And then I wish everybody on Facebook who has a birthday, happy birthday. And then I start on whatever the work of the day is. And I have a calendar that I keep where I have my appointments. And my appointments are they're things where I interact with other people, most of them. Like if I need to do a pre-record for Catholic Answers Live, then okay, that's going to go on the calendar. Or if I have a meeting that I need to attend, like a Catholic Answers staff meeting, then that'll go on the calendar. And so I basically have my appointments, and I make sure that I get ready for my appointments. So like the day before, I do a pre-record for Catholic Answers Live, either the day before or even longer than that, before I get the questions ready for it. So I have all my work done to prepare for the meetings in order to have the meetings be effective. Beyond that, I have open spaces. And what I do in the open spaces, that's when I do my learning. Now, I answer email, of course, and at least to the extent I can, which, I can't always, but I'll answer people's questions by email sometimes. And I do research on various projects, and one of the key ways that I learn is by writing about the research I'm doing. So if I'm preparing, for example, an episode of the Jimmy Akin podcast, not the same as Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, I'll be writing a script for it, and I'll be doing some research for that script. And it's just like in school, when you take notes on the lecture you're hearing, you learn the material better. And in the same way, if I am doing research and I'm reading material or watching material or listening to material to learn about a subject, it helps if I write a script based on that, so that it drills down. It's the effective equivalent of note taking. It also forces me to figure out how to express what I've learned in a useful way for others. That's something I put a high priority on, is being able to communicate in an effective way to people, even if they don't have a technical background in something. And by writing a script or an article or a book or a blog post or whatever it is, where I force myself to articulate something, even if it was technical, in a way that's accessible, it also helps me learn it helps me remember it better, and it helps me learn how to express it better. And so writing, whether it's for a podcast or anything else, is a key way that I also learn. And I just keep going through the day. When I don't have appointments, I switch back into reading and researching and writing mode. And that goes on till about, it varies. I often take a nap for, an hour in the afternoon, but then I get right back up and start back at it. And I'll go till 7 or 8, sometimes 9 at night. But by that point, I'm starting to get a little tired, and I may switch over and watch a few hours of video before going to bed.
Beth, thank you very much for the question. Lots of questions. Go ahead. Yes.
I also listen to audiobooks. Even when I'm lying down to go to sleep or take a nap, I'll listen to audiobooks, and I also listen to them when I'm driving. If I have errands to run, I listen to them then too. So that's another aspect of how I do research, how I do learn, and I'm just always listening to stuff whenever I have a moment.
Again, Beth, thank you very much for the question. This one comes from Smooth Criminal 53184. I
wonder if that's Smooth Criminal's prison number.
I wonder. At first, I thought it was a Michael Jackson fan, but that could be Smooth Criminal's prison number. I have a few questions that I have on my mind for some time now. It is said, it's going to be a few questions. Just stop me if you want to just answer one, Jimmy. It is said that Latin is especially efficacious for prayer and exorcisms because it is the official language of the church. My question is this: for an Eastern Rite Catholic who would be under the authority of their church's head, although the Pope's authority is, of course, universal and preeminent, and have their own codes of canon law, would the native language of that church be more efficacious or similar in efficacy to prayers in Latin? Or would this only apply to the ancient languages? For example, Latin, Greek, Aramaic, Coptic, Hebrew, and possibly Church Slavonic and Arabic.
Well, the only way to settle this question would be by doing experiments, and nobody has actually experimented in this way. So we don't have a definitive answer. Even the idea that Latin is more efficacious than, say, English is anecdotal. It's not something that any exorcists, to my knowledge, have done a study on, where you got two random populations of demoniacs and you exorcise half of them in Latin and half of them in English and see which ones get delivered from demons the fastest. No one's ever done that kind of study. In fact, you'd even want to do it double blind, but that would pose some special challenges. But, we still have anecdotal reports of maybe Latin's more effective. And if that's the case, well, I can think of several reasons why that would be the case. First thing, I don't think it has anything to do with the demons, because demons do not need human language. They communicate their created spirits, their created intellects, and so they communicate mind to mind. Their own mode of communication is thus telepathic. So human language is something for humans. It really doesn't engage angelic nature. So why would the choice of a human language affect a demon more than another human language? Well, one reason could be it's based on the authorization of the church. So if the church has authorized a language for use, then it would be more effective than a language the church has not authorized for use. But then that puts English on the same plane as Latin, because both are we have an English rite of exorcism that's just a translation of the Latin rite of exorcism. And so, they would both have the advantage of being approved. There's also the fact, though, that Latin is sort of the standard or default or traditional language of the Latin church. And maybe that gives it a little extra oomph. On the other hand, that leads us to a second consideration that could lead these lead Latin to be more effective than just standard English, if that's the case, because remember, this is just an anecdotal claim. But if it's the case, one reason could be because it's more meaningful to the humans involved, to the exorcist, to the demoniac. If they view Latin as special in a way they don't view English as special, then the Latin would serve to strengthen their faith in God acting through this rite, and thus that greater faith in God might make the rite more effective if the people have more faith in it. And so if the exorcist believes that Latin is going to be more effective, then it could be more effective. If the demoniac believes that Latin is going to be more effective to help free them of the demon, then that might make it more effective. So I can see both the authorization of the church and the psychological effect of Latin playing a role here. All the same principles would therefore apply to any other language that an exorcism is authorized in, either elsewhere in the Catholic Church or outside of the Catholic Church, because you don't have to be a Catholic to kick bad spirits out of people. It's actually, exorcistic rites are very common all over the world in other religions too. And even Jesus acknowledged, for example, there were Jewish exorcists who were legitimately driving out demons. In any event, if you're, let's say, in an Eastern Rite of the Catholic Church, let's say your church uses Greek or Aramaic or Old Church Slavonic as its traditional language, and the rite is authorized in one of those languages, well, then it'll have the authorization efficacy. And if psychologically people involved, either the exorcist or the demoniac or the assistants, view that language, whether it's Greek or Aramaic or Old Church Slavonic, as this is going to be extra effective, well, then that would help increase your faith and help make it extra effective. So I don't think it has anything to do with the age of the language in particular. It's not like demons care about old human languages, because they don't care about human language at all. But the effect of the language on the humans who are participating, that I can see having a notable effect by virtue of increasing their faith as the rite is performed, as well as the authorization that the church has given to that language.
Smooth Criminal, thanks. That brings us to the break. Right back with more questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
I'm continually amazed and humbled at the way God can work through me to help so many people. Although I have no idea what the callers' questions will be that day, I trust that the Holy Spirit can use my education and experience to guide, challenge, or comfort those who call.
Mast Appeal with Colleen Kelly Mast. Saturday morning, 9 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's Ask Me Anything, and all the questions are in. It's an internet version of Ask Me Anything, and this one comes from Sayan Tan. And what are your thoughts, Jimmy, about whether animals and our pets can be in heaven with us or not?
Well, going back to Aristotelian philosophy, it was believed that the soul of an animal, which is what's known as a sensitive soul rather than a rational soul like humans have, is something that doesn't survive death, according to various medieval theologians like St. Thomas Aquinas. And that's kind of been a default opinion for many through Christian history. But it is not a matter of church teaching. So this is just theological speculation on the part of Aquinas and those who agree with him. And therefore, the opinion has no greater weight than the arguments that can be brought forward in its favor. So I actually did an episode of Mysterious World on this topic. It's episode 203. So you can find it by going to mysterious.com/203. And I went through the arguments that Aquinas proposed for why animal souls would not survive death, and I frankly found them unconvincing. I didn't think they proved what he wanted them to prove. And this is another example where I think, I mean, I have great respect for Aquinas, but I think he sometimes tried to do too much with philosophy and settle points philosophically where you need to take biblical data and empirical data into account more. And it so happens we have some empirical data that would support the existence of an afterlife for at least some animals. People have what are known as near-death experiences, where they clinically die and they continue to have conscious experiences, and then the doctors are able to restart their hearts and they can come back and tell us about these experiences. And there's a particular class of near-death experiences that are what are called peak-in-Darien experiences. The phrase peak-in-Darien, it comes from an old poem. We won't worry about that. But the essence of a peak-in-Darien experience is where either on your deathbed before you die or in the afterlife after you clinically died, you see somebody that you did not know was dead. And then it turns out that person was dead. So in the case of a near-death experience, you die clinically. Let's say your relatives come to greet you and you see your grandfather who you knew was dead, and you see your mother who you knew was dead, but then for some reason your little sister is here and you didn't know she was dead. And then they restart your heart and you say, well, I saw grandfather and I saw mom, but then I saw my little sister and she's not dead. And they say, well, actually she is. We didn't want to tell you, but your little sister recently died. And that's what's known as a peak-in-Darien experience. Well, it so happens that not only do people see their departed human relatives when they have near-death experiences, they also see animals. And I searched a database of thousands of near-death experiences for terms like cat, dog, horse, pet, rabbit, things like that. And depending on how you parse it, like there could be as many as a quarter of near-death experiences involve seeing animals in the afterlife. And some of these are veridical. There's, for example, a notable case of a guy who clinically died. He was greeted by his grandmother and his cat, whom he believed was at home waiting for him while he was in the hospital. And after they restart his heart, he describes his experience, and they say, yeah, actually, your cat died while you were in the hospital. So that would be empirical evidence that that at least some animals have something of an afterlife, because if near-death experiences give us evidence for an afterlife in general, like for other humans, like grandfather and mom and so forth, well, they're going to give us evidence for an animal afterlife too. So I think that I think we need to be more open on this subject, and you can check out mysterious.fm/203 for more information.
Sion Tan, thank you very much for the question. This one comes from a user, and then there's a user number after it. Does the church condone organ donation? Well, there's two different questions. You want to take them one at a time, Jimmy, or just read the whole thing?
We can take them one at a time. So the church does condone organ donation. It is a praiseworthy act, provided that that they're not taking a vital organ, meaning one you need to live. So don't let them take your heart, because you need your heart to live. And in fact, I do not have, I want to donate my organs checked on my driver's license, because they will kill you to get your heart. If they think you're damaged and not going to survive, they will take your heart, and that will kill you. And so that's homicide. So I can't recommend being an organ donor in that sense. But if someone is already dead, and they don't harvest dead hearts, they only harvest living ones. But if the organ is harvested after death, that's fine. if the organ is harvested before death and is non-vital, meaning you can live without it, then it's praiseworthy to do that. So fundamentally, the church is okay with organ donation, but there are some stipulations to make sure it's done in an ethical way, and the ethical way does not involve killing living people.
All right, user, there's that one. And then user has this question. Also, should we vote for a candidate who is for abortion when there is no one who is pro-life? Should we vote for the lesser of two evils?
Well, so if you have no good options, then if you're going to vote, then yeah, you should use your vote to do the most good possible and avoid the most evil possible. And so if you have no one who is completely pro-life, then no one with a realistic chance of winning. I mean, you could always nominate the Pope or someone, but he's not going to win the election. So you have to look realistically at how you use your vote. And if none of the candidates that has a plausible chance of winning is where they need to be, which is frankly normally the case, then you pick the one that's least bad. And that can mean voting for someone who's not fully pro-life or even not pro-life at all, provided the other candidates that have a realistic chance of winning are even worse. Also, an option in some situations is just not voting. But in the main, we want to be active participants in our democracy. And in the main, we want to vote and use our vote in a way that accomplishes the most good and avoids the most evil.
Thanks for those two questions, user. On we go. This is from SD Popesplainer. I don't know if that's San Diego or South Dakota, but either way, I have full confidence that you are knowledgeable about the identity issue. What would you offer in Scripture and the Catechism to someone who identified as a furry?
Well, I know some on this question, but frankly, I haven't really, I haven't thought too much about furries. I'm aware of the concept. I have never spoken with someone who claims to identify as an animal, which is my understanding of what a furry would be. I've certainly never talked to anyone who's really serious about it. I can imagine someone like enjoys dressing up as an animal, but to really identify as or think that they are an animal when in fact they're human would be a sign of mental illness of some form. And because if someone really thought I am a dog when they're clearly a human, I mean, that's psychosis. That's a psychotic break with reality if they really think that. And so if I'm limited to Scripture and the Catechism, I would focus on those parts of Scripture and the Catechism that talk about God making man and making animals and pointing out, you're in this category. You're not in this other category. So, Genesis 1 would be a good text for that. Genesis 2 could also be a possible text for that. There are other passages as well, but hopefully the person doesn't really think that they're an animal, because it should be fairly easy to point out, look, you have, let's say someone thinks they're a sheep. Well, okay, you're not covered in wool and you've got front mounted eyes, not side mounted eyes like a sheep. You're bipedal and sheep are quadrupedal. Sheep have tails. You don't got a tail. So you're clearly a human being here. Now, if you feel an affinity for sheep, that's fine. People can love animals and care about animals and stuff like that. But you need to recognize what you really are, and you need to be okay with what you really are. If you're not okay with it, then that's a sign that there's something wrong. And that something wrong would, since it's a mental thing, it would be a psychological thing. And I would suggest getting psychological help with that, because it's not properly ordered for a human to feel that they're a sheep rather than a human. The reality is you're a human, and our feelings need to be brought in line with that. And if our feelings are not in line with that, well, that's understandable, but that's a subject that because humans are broken, but that's something that needs to be addressed. And so I would, in addition to talking to them about scripture and the catechism, I would encourage them to get mental assistance.
SD Popesplaner, thank you very much for the question. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's Ask Me Anything. If you've got a question, if you want to get in on one of these internet Ask Me Anythings, you should check out Jimmy Akin's various social media, and you can contact him. You're always welcome to send us an email at radio@catholic.com, and we'll gather them up and we'll get them to Jimmy and try to get your question on the air. It's a lot of fun to do these internet. And a lot of times it makes it available to people who aren't available to pick up the phone and call while we're on the air. So maybe you're in a time zone or a country or a situation that makes it difficult to call, and you'd like to get in on one of these internet Ask Me Anythings. Radio@catholic.com, or just get it to Jimmy one way or another, and we'll do our best to get it on. We got lots more to come right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Many people have forgotten just how revolutionary the Bible creation stories are. But the first 3 chapters of Genesis are a powerful challenge to anyone in any generation who would undervalue human lives. In the Beginning, the new book by Monica Migliorino Miller, will take you on a fantastic journey through the first chapters of Genesis, unfolding the richness of life as God sees it. Get In the Beginning today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
When it comes to Catholic teachings about Mary, there's one question we hear more than any other. Where is that in the Bible? The answer? Everywhere. In Bible Mary, the Mother of Jesus and the Word of God, Father John Weiss opens Scripture to reveal a Mary who has been hiding in plain sight. Order your copy of Bible Mary today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
What was the church like in its infancy? In a word, Catholic, and Joe Heschmeyer has the receipts. In his best-selling book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, he gives you the details from the historical records of the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Right now, get a copy for just $10, plus free shipping if you live in the continental United States. Get more information and order The Early Church Was the Catholic Church at theearlychurchwascatholic.com.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's an Ask Me Anything. All the questions this time from the internet. And some of the folks have given us their real names, some of them using their internet name. And this one I would assume is not a given name. Lost Archivist asks this.
That's
Jimmy.
a cool name, though.
Is a cool name.
Is he an archivist of the Lost Archive, or is he an archivist who is lost?
Yeah, right. And it's well, that is a good name for you, Jimmy. It's a mysterious name. Given
this is not me, though.
No, right. Lost Archivist wants to know this: given the tragic shortage of priests, what would you recommend to someone seeking a spiritual director who is having a hard time finding one?
Well, there are a number of options. One of the things that I've done in the past is seek a spiritual director not a diocesan priest, because they're often very busy with parish life, but and don't necessarily have a lot of time. But I've gone to monasteries and had a spiritual director who lives at the monastery, and their life is a little bit different because they're focused around the activities of the monastery, so they're keeping busy that way, but they don't have the the same pastoral demands that a parish priest does. So that's one possibility. On the other hand, another possibility would be telecommuting, because, all you got to be able to do for spiritual direction is converse. And these days we can converse at a distance, and people are doing telemedicine, and there's no reason they can't do telespiritual direction. So you might, if there's not a priest locally who you can talk with, you could do video appointments with them, either on your phone or over the internet. You want to make sure that you're talking in a secure way if you're talking about anything sensitive, but you could do that. People, like I said, people do telemedicine, they do telecounseling, they could do telespiritual direction. And that again would be open to both diocesan priests and monastic priests. You might seek out a retired priest to serve as a spiritual director. On the other hand, you don't have to stick with a priest, because being a priest is not a requirement for being a spiritual director. There are other people who do spiritual direction. Deacons sometimes do spiritual direction. Nuns sometimes do spiritual direction. Monks sometimes do spiritual direction. Lay people sometimes do spiritual direction. The qualifications you're looking for is, does this person have a good, strong sense of the faith, of Catholic faith and morals? And are they a wise person who can give me an objective perspective on the issues that are of concern to me? And so don't limit yourself to a priest if you have trouble finding a priest. I've even had requests to be spiritual director before. Unfortunately, I don't have time to. But you don't have to limit yourself to just a priest, because what you're really looking for is someone that has a firm grasp of Catholic faith and morals, and who has the ability to converse with you and give you an objective and wise perspective on the issues that are of concern to you in your own spiritual life.
I hope that was helpful to you, Lost Archivist. Thank you very much for the question. This next one comes from CW4821. I'd like your advice on what to tell my 9-year-old about Blessed Imelda Lambertini, the young girl who reportedly died of joy upon receiving the Eucharist. After hearing about Blessed Imelda, my 9-year-old is scared that the Eucharist will kill her too. And for my own curiosity, do you know if this is a documented account or more of a pious legend? Thanks.
Well, this is apparently more of a documented account. Imelda Lambertini, Blessed Imelda Lambertini, lived in the 1300s. Memory serves, she actually died at 11 rather than 9, if I recall correctly. But apparently the account was documented fairly early on, so this is not like a legend that happened, that is first recorded hundreds of years after the person allegedly lived. This is something we apparently have contemporaneous information about. And she was declared blessed in the 1800s and is in fact a patron saint of first communicants. The account of it that you may have heard, though, may not be fully accurate. My understanding is, Imelda had asked to receive Holy Communion at age 5, which is earlier than was customary in her day. It is possible for a child to receive communion that early. In fact, I've heard it reported that Pius XII would sometimes give communion to children who were age 5, but it wasn't common in Imelda's day. It was common at a later age. And she then joined a convent, and she continued to request the Eucharist. And then at a certain point, one of the, priests who was present saw like a special sign over her, like the Eucharist appearing above her head. And he took that as a sign to go ahead and give her communion. So he did. And then and she didn't just die of joy. That you may have heard someone say that, but that is not what's in the account I've read. In the account I've read, there was this miracle where, like, a priest saw the sign of the Eucharist above her, took that as a sign to go ahead and give her communion. He gives her communion. Then she goes back to her pew to say prayers. And then stuff kind of goes on. And then, the life of the monastery goes on. Eventually, it gets time for a meal. So they come looking for Imelda, and one of the sisters, sees her and calls her name, but she doesn't move. And so she goes up and taps her. And at that point, they realize Imelda's dead. And so it wasn't that she received the Eucharist and was so overjoyed she just died. That's not what happened. She received the Eucharist. She went back to her pew to say prayers. And then at some unknown point, she died. And given that her receiving communion in the first place was preceded by a miraculous sign that told the priest, go ahead and give her communion, this could have been God's way of ensuring that she received communion before she died. She may have had some medical condition that was going to mean she would go to be with God that day, and God wanted to make sure that she did get the communion that she wanted before that happened. And so what we can say is that she received communion near the time she died, but that doesn't tell us that she died because she received communion. It very well may be she was going to die anyway, and God made sure that she got communion before she died. So I would say this is so that's one reason why your daughter need not fear this, unless, there's a miraculous sign just before she gets communion that, we're not even in the same situation. And even if there was a miraculous sign, it wouldn't mean the same thing is going to happen. Fundamentally, this is a rare situation. This is like the only time that has come to public attention that this has ever happened in 2,000 years. And there have been billions of Catholics in the last 2,000 years receiving Holy Communion, and they just don't get killed when they receive Holy Communion. So given all that, I would say that your 9-year-old really doesn't have anything to worry about here. Communion is a sign of God's love for us, and we should receive it as an act of love for him. And we don't really need to worry or be afraid. This is an anomalous situation, and Jesus is not trying to kill us by coming to us in communion. He's trying to love us by coming to us in communion.
CW, thank you for that. I hope that was helpful for you and for your daughter. This one comes from Alistair. The strongest challenge I ever heard from a Protestant about the Assumption is, how can the Catholic Church dogmatically declare that the Assumption was believed at all times by the Church when there is literally no evidence anywhere in the Bible, Church Father writings, or apocryphal writings of the first century?
Okay, so we've got an artificial limitation here to the first century. So what this person is demanding in this objection that you've heard, Alistair, is that we cough up first century evidence for this. Well, the vast majority of Christian literature that people are familiar with from the first century is the writings of the New Testament. But is it true that the New Testament doesn't contain anything about the Assumption? Well, actually, that's debatable, because we have Revelation 12, where John sees a woman in heaven who gives birth to the Messiah, and she's caught up. She's depicted initially as being in heaven, but also she is later caught up to escape from the persecution of the dragon. And this woman gives birth to the Messiah. So, pop quiz, Psychelet, who was the mother of the Messiah?
Oh, I can do this one. Mary.
Yeah, so this woman is in some sense Mary. Now, that doesn't mean it's only Mary, because one of the things we know about the book of Revelation is John uses what's called polyvalent symbolism. That is, a single symbol can stand for more than one thing. But, when you're an ancient reader and you see woman gives birth to Messiah, oh, that's Mary, is going to be one of the first things you think of. You may also notice, okay, so she's clothed in the sun and has the moon at her feet and has a crown of 12 stars. That sounds like Jacob's dream in Genesis. So she could also represent Israel, or the spiritual Israel, the church. So there can be other dimensions to who this woman is too, but Mary's one of them. And given that she's depicted as being in heaven and as being caught up to get away from the devil, both of those could be references to the Assumption. So I would say the claim is not proven that there is no reference to it in first century Christian literature. The second, or in the New Testament, this passage is arguably exactly that. So, well, what about outside of the New Testament? Well, the thing is, we have very little that's outside of the New Testament from the first century. And if you pick many Christian doctrines, it takes a few centuries before we have a record of it. And simply because of how little literature we have from the first century, you cannot expect every given doctrine, especially doctrines of a lesser nature, to be reflected in first century literature. What we can say about the Assumption is it is reflected in literature that dates from the 200s and 300s. But if you're imposing an artificial constraint of the first century, then you're asking for an unreasonable test, because there is so little from that time period that we cannot expect that it would be mentioned in the literature we have, given how little of that literature has survived.
That will bring us to the break. Alistair, thank you very much for the question. Right back with more Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Hi, this is Mike Aquilina with a few words about St. Basil the Great. St. Basil is known as a pastor and thinker. He wrote theological masterpieces still read today. But he was also a builder who found new institutional forms for Christian charity. He built a complex that included a hospital, a hostel, a soup kitchen, a trade school. It was so vast it was called the New City, like the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it's an Ask Me Anything episode. And all the questions have already been asked. They're in. I just get to read them to Jimmy. Our Lord, that's the letter R, Lord 017 asks this: what separates the new atheists from the old atheists? And what are the beliefs of the new atheists?
Well, what separates the new atheists from the old atheists is Brandon. It's just a matter of Brandon. Their beliefs are the same. They're both atheists. There's no real difference, except that a group of folks who were authors and speakers publishing in this area, this got called the New Atheists. And so they were a kind of public revival of atheism they were, I guess, a revival of atheism in the public sphere that generated some noise. So to the extent that they're different than the atheists who preceded them or the atheists that followed them, because they've started to fade from the scene, I would say, well, they had a knack for getting some extra publicity, basically. And they got branded as the New Atheists, and that was a hot term for a while, but it's kind of faded. Several of the so-called four horsemen of the new atheism, like Daniel Dennett, have passed on, and others like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris have somewhat faded from the scene, so they're not as prominent as they were. But basically, this was a branded move to try to attract new attention to atheism, but it was fundamentally the same old atheism. I don't know. I'm tempted to say that the new atheists had a bit more attitude than some of the atheists that preceded them, but putting it politely, I could put it more bluntly and say they were bigger jerks, but I'm tempted to say they had a bit more attitude, but I don't know that that's the case, because if you go back into the 20th century and look at some of the atheists there, like A.J. Ayer, for example, or Bertrand Russell, they could have some attitude as well. And if you go back to Voltaire, oh, wow, do you get attitude. So I don't know that they were particularly distinct in the attitude that they displayed.
All right. Well, thank you very much, R, for the question. On we go. Jackie wants to know this. If there are many other planets with life, then how would they be saved? Did Christ's death and resurrection count for them also? And if so, how would they know? Or did God save each planet with aliens differently?
Well, you asked some good questions, and unfortunately, we don't know the answers, because we don't know if there are other planets with intelligent life. There very well may be, but we don't know for sure, and we haven't made contact with them, so we haven't had a chance to find out about them and what provisions God may have made for them. It's possible that they might not need salvation because they may never have fallen into sin in the first place. It's also possible they did fall, and they fell in an irrevocable way like the angels did, in which case they wouldn't be saved. On the other hand, if they're like us and they fell into sin in a revocable way, then God could save them through the death of Christ here on earth, because Christ paid an infinite price when he died on the cross. And so that would be sufficient to cover their sins. And if God chooses to apply Christ's human death to them, then it would be efficacious for them, and they could be saved through Christ. In terms of how they would know about Christ, well, God could reveal it to them, or he could just be merciful to them until we make contact and can tell them about Christ. The same way here on earth, the last time we found a new world, when people from the old world, meaning Europe, found the Americas or the New World, well, God had been merciful with the Native Americans until the missionaries could get over here and tell them about Jesus. The same thing could happen with another planet. On the other hand, it's also possible that Jesus could incarnate on their planet. Thomas Aquinas points out, once you've incarnated once, that shows you can do this. It's within the power of omnipotence. And since God is omnipotent, he could incarnate more than once, and he could do that and save an alien planet that same way. Or, since Aquinas also points out, God didn't have to redeem us through Jesus's death. He could have done it any number of ways. It's possible God could save people of an alien world any number of ways that didn't involve Jesus dying on a cross, or he may have just applied Jesus's death on a cross here on earth to them. Ultimately, we'll have to sort all that out after we meet him.
Jackie,
if we meet him.
Thanks very much for the question, Jackie. This one comes from Raphael. What are some of the best ways to practice becoming as humble as possible, like Our Lady?
Well, I would say meditating on Our Lady is one way of doing that. Thinking about, even though she's the mother of God, she doesn't show herself off. She's barely in the New Testament. I mean, she is there, but she's not, it's not all about her. And and that reflects her son's will, and therefore that reflects Mary's will. Mary endorses the will of her son, and she wants her son to be the focus. So thinking about ourselves in relation, and Mary's example is a way to grow in humility, to realize it's about him. It's not all about us. And we don't need to have, super prominence. Also, in a practical way, deferring to others, it's something that's recommended in the New Testament. Jesus says, take a lower seat and wait for someone to move you up higher. Don't just assume the more prominent seat at a banquet. Well, in the same way, look for opportunities in our lives to serve others and be humble and defer to others and not press our rights and not press ourselves forward, and generally be a loving person. I mean, one of the things is humility is a direct outgrowth of love. So, and love, as we know, is God's highest priority. That's why it's the two great commandments: love God and love your neighbor. So, if you genuinely think about how can I be loving to other people, that's going to put you in a position of humility. And so the more you can genuinely love other people, the more humble you're going to end up being. And the more you're going to be fulfilling the commands that God is most concerned that you fulfill.
Raphael, thank you very much for the question. On and on we go because there's a few more minutes left and there's lots of questions here. Jackie asks, is it possible for your guardian angel not to like you or something about you? For example, maybe your guardian angel doesn't like the same kind of music you listen to. I wonder if a guardian angel ever feels like they preferred getting someone else to guide.
Well, I would say on that last question, no. I think every guardian angel, because they're confirmed in goodness and blessedness, is going to be happy there with the person they're guarding. It's not like, oh, I got this guy, I wish I had someone else. They don't think that way. They may recognize I have greater challenges as a guardian than some of my fellow guardians, but they're up for those challenges. So they're not going to be unhappy about having you as a charge. Does that mean they're going to approve of everything that you do? Of course not. That's one of the reasons you need a guardian, is to help protect you from some of the mistakes that humans make. So, if you're listening to satanic death metal thrash rock or whatever, your guardian angel is not going to approve of that. On the other hand, if you're not listening to anything bad, let's say you're listening to country rock, it's not like your guardian angel is going to say, oh, he really should be listening to country rather than country rock. That's something that angels are not really going to care about, human music. That's kind of like we don't really care about, does my dog prefer to eat, this kind of meat or that kind of meat. It's like, whatever my dog prefers, that's okay. That's a dog thing. I don't really have an opinion on what a dog's tastes are. And in the same way, there's a lot of stuff about you and me that our guardian angel is not really going to have an opinion about because it's not really relevant to his job guarding us. It's only going to be on the things he's really going to be concerned about is my human doing good stuff or is he doing bad stuff? So yeah, they would have, if you're doing something bad or something that's not helpful, then yeah, they wouldn't prefer that, but they're still up for guarding you and they care about you and they're looking out for you. They got your back.
All right, Jackie, thanks very much for the question. This one comes from Trent. I hope seems very serious, this question. Who would win in a fight, the Incredible Hulk or felony tax evasion? Asking for a friend.
It's going to depend on the nature of the fight in question. If it's a physical fight, then the Incredible Hulk is going to win because felony tax evasion just does not have the same physical strength that the Hulk has. So if it's a physical fight, the Hulk is going to win. On the other hand, if it's a financial fight, then felony tax evasion is going to win because the Hulk is too enraged to be able to take on the tactics that are involved in felony tax evasion. And so felony tax evasion would win in that case.
Excellent question. What's one everyone's asking though, Trent? But thanks. Somebody's got to ask it. Katerina.
I like how he says at the end of it, asking for a friend.
Yeah, it's like he doesn't. I don't care who would win between the Hulk and felony. You want to try this other question or no? That's too long.
We're getting that's kind of a long one.
Yeah. All right. So what about
skip down to the next one?
All right. Bill, why was it necessary for the church to make the Immaculate Conception and Assumption into dogmas versus leaving them as non-mandatory for belief teachings?
Well, it wasn't necessary, but necessity is not the only criterion when it comes to proclaiming something definitively. The fundamental criterion is truth. If something's true, then it can be proclaimed infallibly. And it was true that Mary was immaculately conceived and that she was assumed into heaven. And Pius IX and Pius XII chose to infallibly define it. For example, a parallel would be the existence of angels. That's not a major doctrine, but it is in the Bible, and it could be infallibly defined because it's true. And in the same way, these popes determined that this is true, and they wanted to make that abundantly clear, which is what infallible teaching is.
Bill, thank you for the question. Thanks, everybody, for the question. Thank you, Jimmy, for being here with us for 2 hours.
My pleasure.
And that will do it for us. If you want to get your questions to us, shoot them over to radio@catholic.com or get them to Jimmy if you want to be on the next internet Ask Me Anything. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.